And now we're live. Cool.
Wonderful.
Okay. Uh, Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the On the Couch podcast, where we talk about Couchform and the reasons behind it, and why we built this wonderful school of thought for roleplay. Uh, we're going to talk about quite a few things today, so I'm very excited. But before we get into any of that, I would like to also introduce my two lovely podcast people. What's the word? What's the word for that? I'm losing my mind.
It's the pod people,
The
and that's
pod,
just what we are. Yeah,
the
I
You
mean,
got
two
you got your
pods.
yeah.
co-host and guest or
Guests. Well, co-host
podcast
and guests.
tiers.
Yes. 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 Don't mind us being on the beach. We're on the couch, and that's what matters.
My feet are
So
in the water.
my cat's yelling at me, and while she does that, I'm gonna have my co-host and guest here introduce themselves. So we'll go ahead and start with Cyllin.
Hi, hello. I'm Cyllin. I roleplay occasionally, and talk about roleplay much more occasionally. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's really about it, honestly.
I like it. That's good.
Yeah, and this is where I point. I point directly at the alligator that is sitting right next to me.
Oh, hi. I'm actually prepared for this one because I've been doing it a lot lately. I am Neon. I've been doing roleplay for over a decade now, and every time I look at the year, it's like, oh god, it's now coming up to 13 years of roleplay.
Oh my god.
A lot of my experience is in LARP. That is where I draw a lot of my information from, is my LARP experience. And I would love to share it with the people of the VRRP community.
13 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're
I
old.
That's
can
pretty
believe
cool.
I'm older than 13. It's wild.
I would hope so.
Oh gosh,
I started LARPing at the age of 2. Oh my god. I guess that leaves me.
Yep. I point as our lovely host has not introduced themselves yet.
Oh my god, Dylan's pointing at me. Alright, whew. Pressure's on. Alright, here we go.
I'm also pointing.
I'm Solus. Just wanted to sink in. I'm actually gonna get it. Alright. So I'm Solus. I started role playing in earnest when I actually joined VR roleplay. Did basically a couple like one-off D&D sessions with friends. Didn't really kind of grasp onto the whole role playing part of it. Was mostly just a game for me at the time. But I really got into it when I started watching VR roleplay on some various Twitch streams and decided to get into it myself. Got a headset, got into some role plays, and it's been about I would say a little over 4 years now that I've been role playing in it, and the last two of them have been spent doing a lot of theorizing and a lot less role playing. Used to be very like I don't know 3 or 4 days a week, just big time role player, and nowadays it's maybe like I don't know once every 2 weeks, once a month, something like that. A lot more writing and talking than I am doing role playing, but very excited to be doing some of that writing and talking because it's like some of the stuff that's actually behind roleplay is very interesting, and I never would have understood that before, like actually looking at what people have written and ideated before we came around as a roleplay community. I see Curlon's committing tax fraud. That's great. Okay. Um. So now that we have all introduced ourselves, we want to talk about, well, what is Couchform? Right? We've mentioned it by name. We talked about it being a school of thought, but like, what is it really? Um, and after I give my little spiel about it, I'll absolutely invite Cyllin and Neon here to give their thoughts on what they believe it is as well. to give kind of the short and sweet version of it, what Couchform is a style of roleplay that we have determined that we would enjoy seeing and playing in. It is a school of thought that encompasses a core focus on themes, which, if you'll notice, is the title of today's podcast, which is what we're going to talk about later on, and building around those themes very deliberately with a focus on design and how it informs the roleplay, playing to lift to lift the scenario around the themes that we build everything around, and so on and so forth. A lot of the principles we kind of lay out within Couchform, which are kind of the core of the school of thought, are very dependent on this focus and kind of create this sort of cohesive approach to these sort of like long form campaign style role plays that we tend to run in VR.
Yeah. I suppose I can add to that just a little bit. I guess Solus has covered kind of what Couchform is broadly. I would say that from like the personal perspective, I would say that I could define it as two different things. First, there is sort of like the the somewhat personal, selfish look where like Couchform is the sort of role play that I personally want to see in VR chat role play. This is like, if I were in a role play, like this is the sort of role play I'd like to be in. That's at the end of the day really what it is, role play style. Of course, I imagine Solus probably has similar thoughts because we did collaborate on writing it, but also I've spent a lot of my time in school and university, and like there is just a whenever you have ideas, it is just wonderful to write them down and share them with other people, because even more so than talking about it, and I know today we're here just talking about stuff, but kind of recording and sharing ideas is just a really wonderful way to kind of build knowledge and kind of like come up with better things, right? If you have a conversation between two people, that conversation might be productive, but the moment you kind of take an idea and you write it on a piece of paper, then you're basically it becomes conversation with everybody who then reads that. So that's kind of the other thing that I really want out of Couchform is, well, we have a roleplay style and we've written it down. So yeah.
Yeah, let's the things that survive the test of time are those that are written, right? It's certainly the case. Is there anything you wanted to add to it, Neon?
I'm not sure there's too much I can add. I suppose it's a overall thing is like a way to bring themes into roleplay and help unify what the roleplay is about, which is something I very much enjoy. So I guess like on a selfish thing, it very much emphasizes the exploration or something, which is very much how I like to roleplay.
Yeah, I think you actually brought up a really good point. There is one question that I really like to use as kind of a paraphrase of this, which, because themes can be sometimes a bit like nebulous and confusing, and people will kind of approach the term a little bit differently sometimes. But the question, what is this role play about? I think really well encompasses that idea of like finding the core of what's actually being focused about in the role play, and then kind of again building around that. I like it. Cool. So we're gonna dive, I guess, a little bit more into the I guess personal aspirations here. So to kind of lay out the picture for everyone who's watching. So the way that Couchform started was ultimately between discussions between myself and Stellan, where we kind of decided to start writing out these sort of ideas that we were coming up with in kind of voice chats. And at some point, have decided to kind of start writing out these principles, and then at some point formulated that, like, we want more people to have a say on this. We want some more ideas in the pot here to come up with something a little bit more robust. And so we brought some people on board that we thought would have some well thought out ideas of their own, and were generally very thoughtful with their approaches to roleplay, and B, would be able to bring some sort of different ideas. We didn't want people that thought exactly the same. We tended toward people that would bring a unique perspective to what we were trying to build, and would try to help build that with us by giving us kind of the alternative angles, things that we haven't considered. So the reason why I'm saying that is I then I personally find a lot of interest in, like, thinking about, well, for Scylla and I, who are kind of the owners of the school of thought, and then those that have contributed, like Neon here. I'm always curious as to, like, the reasons behind being involved in the way that they have, and understanding that. So I guess the question for you two, and that I will also pose to myself afterward, is why Couchform? Why did you two get involved? And yeah, I guess we'll go from there.
Always why Couchform, never how Couchform.
Yeah, I mean, we're just sitting on this couch. We never really asked anything, have we?
Roleplay is reclining. That's.
It's
Oh my god.
I wish to embody being comfy at all points in time and just relaxing. That is okay. No, but in all seriousness, I suppose I've already covered my first personal reason, right? Like my first personal reason is, like, I think VR roleplay. I know writing. Writing is really old-fashioned at this point, but, like, I think in my personal opinion, VR roleplay would benefit a lot from, if not written, then at least kind of like recorded, information. The sort of things we do are really, really, really cool, but it's also really hard to find out about, right? It's really hard to find out about, really hard to share, really hard to kind of reproduce the sort of discussions that we've been having around this space. So that would be, reason number one for why Couchform, is just to put ideas on the table and hopefully encourage other people to do the same. But then also, I suppose, having said that, Couchform is the sort of roleplay that I would like to see, that does kind of, carry an implication with it. That, I think, while there are lots of lovely roleplays in the space right now, I think, like, there are certain things that I want that we're currently working towards, and so, like, I hope that kind of by sharing these ideas, that maybe in the next few years we can see some of those ideas in the space, because I would love to see those, because once again, that's the sort of roleplay that I personally like. So it's somewhat, I guess, selfish reason, but that's what I enjoy. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess for me it's pretty similar, where it's showing, like, the more ways of doing roleplay, and, like, giving more variety to things, but on a very personal sort of thing. It tries to answer a lot of the issues that I've had and personally have, like, run into. So I'm very much for that.
Yeah, we kind of done a lot collectively to, like, I guess, target a bunch of, like, ideas and things that we've seen, right? and like kind of really nailed down like our sort of stances on them. Um, my own personal kind of why Couchform was is very similar to Selen's in that there's I having seen VR roleplay kind of evolve uh, from the point that I joined, and even before then, what I've seen. I joined. I want to say it was like mid season 2 of Ascension Academy. It was like right after season 1 of Callus Row ended, and back then roleplay was like vastly different. Um, just kind of seeing how it evolved and the kind of things that have evolved with it, the standards and practices that people have kind of carried over time, has been very interesting to me. I absolutely enjoy seeing all of the ways that people have found that they enjoy role playing and the things that they have kind of pulled forward. I have also seen things that people have gotten used to that may that don't really that I don't personally vibe with. All right, and to a degree, depending on which one becomes more popular, you tend to not find as much of the things that you might like, or maybe you do like it. It's a matter of like preference or whatever. What I where I kind of like align specifically with Cylin's reason is that like none of this to that point has been written down, right? A lot of this has been like kind of word of mouth or common practice or just like the way people have roleplay since they joined. Right? Maybe someone joins into one roleplay, they kind of stay within that bubble and they kind of experience only the things around it. Right. My hope and my goal with uh, creating Couchform was effectively to one define a style as explicitly as possible to make something with a very clear focus that, in our eyes, addresses things we see as stylistic problems and also some essential problems, which we'll actually go over later. Um, and also to kind of encourage others to do the same, because we know there are a lot of different styles of VR roleplay. There are so many of them, and a lot of them, if you put them in the same project, don't really pan out too well together. So our kind of view on that is like the most fulfilling kind of experience you can get out of a VR roleplay or just a roleplay in general is if you really kind of define this shared style, uh, where instead of kind of butting heads on like what the preferred way to roleplay in a group is, you're focusing more on like kind of how to heighten these sorts of experiences that you're already going for. So it'll just generally make things better. But yeah, all of that put together, just kind of writing out these ideas we had on paper, or I guess on Google Doc in this case, and hoping effectively for that turnaround of the community kind of moving toward this more documented style of recording how they roleplay is definitely something that drove my involvement in building this out and my hope for it in the future.
I am itching to talk about style.
Ah,
We've mentioned we've said the word a few times, but
yeah.
I'm just like, role play style. It's very nebulous, Couchform is a role play style, but what do we mean by that?
Yeah, do you wanna dive into that now?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just like, how many times can we say the word without like talking
Please.
about it?
Style,
Do
style,
tell me
style,
about
style.
style and what it is.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I can sure do that right now. All right. So yeah, as we mentioned, Couchform is a role play style, but we kind of wanted to kind of think about what we're doing here, in the sense of like something that is a style, something that is stylistic is whatever the it's the combination of choices that a roleplay designer might make for their roleplay, which basically covers almost everything. Almost. There's a little asterisk. We'll save the asterisk for later, but um, part of the roleplay style is basically almost everything about the roleplay is stylistic. Like choices, including, for example, um, how the role play is scheduled, like when does it run, um is it does it include theater of the mind, do you have dice rolls, do you have combat, do you have are do players write their own characters, or are they pre-written? um a lot of these things are entirely subjective and completely depend on the sort of experience that you want to have. There are, I mean, essentially an infinite number of different levels that you can tweak, you can pull, change, and all of them are equally valid. Um, I suppose in this case, Couchform isn't even like one set of levers. It's still quite broad. The design space is still quite broad, but the idea is that we've narrowed down the sort of infinite space of potential designs to like a certain subset of that. Which is not to say that anything outside of that style is bad. In fact, that's kind of like the opposite of what I want to say. Um, like literally the opposite. Um, it's just kind of, but I think it's important to recognize that, right? I think that's really, really, really important that when we're talking about role play, most of the time, like probably like 95% of the time, we're talking about different role play styles. And y- and like having disagreements about different styles, I mean, can get really interesting. You can get like really cool ideas from other people who have different styles than you. But I think it's really important to kind of recognize that all the different styles are equally valid. And I suppose Couchform is just one of those styles.
Oh, sorry, I realized that I was still muted on my stream. Whoops. So just tangent to that, we've probably all been in kind of a situation in which we've either heard of or been in a conversation with someone who has talked about a correct style of roleplay, right? Like this is the right way to roleplay. This is the correct style. And like Dylan said, a lot of these sorts of instances generally point to like stylistic elements. Different things that people might do in roleplay that are kind of a practice of the type of roleplay that they're doing. Things around maybe combat and how to handle that. Like there's so many elements of it that like really it makes a lot more sense to kind of think of the to think of the stylistic stuff as like everything but the essential stuff, which is another thing that we can start talking about too.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've certainly been in lots of different kinds of roleplay and, had a blast in all of them. I mean, I think I certainly have my favorites, right? Like, I have like certain things that I maybe like more than others, but that's, personal preference, I suppose, not, not you have to do things this way.
Yeah. So, uh, I guess I did hint at it just a little bit ago, but basically, the way that we define stylistic is basically everything that is not essential. Uh, and we, in the preamble of the Couchform, kind of we expand on these quite a bit to kind of put out some examples of both. And in the case of essential methods of play, we're effectively defining them as things that are required and necessary for roleplay to happen safely and responsibly. And so it's kind of the elements of building, running, and playing within a roleplay that we consider to be kind of the ethical necessities of running a roleplay in a responsible way. And basically everything besides that is stylistic. So what we have within that, which is currently listed, is the first one is safety. And this basically means having some sort of framework for players to engage safely within a roleplay. Doesn't necessarily need to be like, wearing the bubble suit around the person kind of safe, but something that ensures that you don't have any like worst case scenarios, or at least if you do, you are prepared and have the tools to handle and calibrate through situations that might be difficult. The second is communication. So talking about things, which is like communication is sometimes kind of used as this very broad strokes sort of ask for a lot of people I have seen. It's just you can't really just say communicate more and then just not say what that means, right? But for what we have, we kind of define it as this like this idea of keeping things transparent. So in the case of designing a roleplay, talking about the themes and the goals of the roleplay and the direction, rather than keeping them secret, is something we kind of file under communication. Communicating ideas between players, having players talk to each other about things that they plan, that is also under communication.
It's communication in all its forms, and oh boy, there are a lot of forms of communication.
Oh yeah.
Oh boy.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah. So yeah, I think in short, I think the essential methods here are the essential parts of roleplay, right? We have the essential and we have the stylistic parts of roleplay. And what we're trying to say is that probably like 95% of like roleplay design is stylistic, but like there's like the really core essential stuff. Those are the things that you need to do to run a role. Well, first of all, you need to do to run a roleplay, period, or the things that you need to do to run a roleplay in a safe and ethical way. And what we, or the reason that we discuss this so thoroughly in kind of the preamble of Couchform is because, well, 95% of what we're talking about in Couchform is stylistic. And we want to be really, really, really clear that, like, we think it's stylistic, and that we think that we don't think that like this is the one way to do roleplay. That being said, there are, I think, a couple of things listed in those essential methods that we do think are maybe a bit underrepresented in the current like climate of VR roleplay. Namely, probably safety being a big one, and so that is maybe one of the points in Couchform that is not stylistic, and therefore is a hill that we are willing to die on. But pretty much everything else is entirely stylistic, and up to your own creative decision.
Yeah.
But I think we can probably talk about essential methods because I think it's really important and really interesting. I think it's a really, really interesting topic of like, well, why are these things essential? You know, why can't you have a role play without these things?
Yeah, I mean, like the the point that you just made about like what exactly we're asserting that's essential, right? Like, and why we're doing it. Safety is a big one. Safety is absolutely huge. It's something that we've very strongly focused on because we've
Mhm.
effectively kind of asserted them as part of our principles as a critique of the lack thereof, right? Um, so we're hoping that it kind of like pushes this more into the spotlight, like pushes these like importances of safety and why we focus on it so much. So like we could start there, like why safety, right?
I I actually have like I think a really good analogy here.
Go for it.
Um, I've kind of found relatively recently. So this is like a bit of like a statistic. Um, so you know, skydiving, right, is usually used as an example of like a really dangerous activity, right? Like that's I mean, because you know, jumping out of a plane is pretty terrifying, right? I certainly would never do it. Um, but like statistically, right? Statistically, skydiving is actually significantly safer than generally just flying an airplane. And you know, you hear that and you're like, what the heck? Well, why? How could that possibly be? You know, like why would jumping out of an airplane be safer than being in one? Um, and I suppose that's not entirely accidental. I suppose the reason is right because skydiving is such a dangerous activity. It just you know factually skydiving is pretty dangerous. There are so many safety regulations surrounding like licensed skydiving agencies. There's so many safety regulations, even on top of the already, you know, numerous flight safety regulations, that they just have fewer accidents, right? They just you have so many safety regulations that the objectively more dangerous activity actually statistically becomes safer because they mess up less often. Um, and I think that's kind of like the really big reason for you know why safety. Um, Now role play is you know thankfully especially you know VR role play is thankfully not quite as dangerous as skydiving thankfully. Um, but at the same time you know we're dealing with you know or at least potentially dealing with heavy topics and emotions and like you know things that can make people feel things, and you know emotions can be powerful and also have the potential to hurt people. And if we want to have the most amount of fun that we possibly can, then it's a really good thing to think about like, well, how can we set up the culture surrounding VR roleplay to be as safe as possible so we don't have to worry about, you know, accidents or messing up and we can just focus on having fun. That's really what safety is about to me. It's much more about, you know, enabling things rather than you know preventing things, even though right counterintuitively you enable the role play by preventing stuff, which is you know in this case accidents. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of the idea, is that you know by focusing on safety we can do more things and we can focus on having fun.
That in my experience, doing roleplay is the one of the biggest reasons to use safety is so you can explore more things and go further with your roleplay than what you would otherwise normally be able to do. Because I can't remember who said it, but someone said roleplay is often about pushing boundaries but not limits. I think actually it might have been 404 who said that.
Yeah, I think it was.
Um, yeah. So safety certainly allows us to do that, where we can start uh, delving deeper into topics and discovering more about ourselves and what we believe about these things um, through role play in a manner that otherwise would be very uncomfortable and very emotionally damaging. Whereas if we have these safety mechanics in, we can further delve into these without as much worry as we might otherwise have.
Yeah, there's like, I guess this notion. I think it's not as like probably not as well understood within our space because VR roleplay is still young despite having several years in it. But there's a lot of studies out there, like psychological studies that talk about like the effects of roleplay and like things like post LARP depression. That is something that's already been kind of addressed in the LARP space with kind of talking about debriefing and how you can effectively ramp down from a session in a way that kind of prevents this from happening. All right, it's just one of those things. Actually, Neon, I have a small question for you. Considering you have decades, centuries even of LARP experience,
Millennia.
like you're super old and super experienced in the ways.
I am the wise wizard of the roleplay world.
So like, I'm a bit curious. Like, have you like thinking of like safety and how it's been like incorporated in roleplay? Have you like seen it change even in LARP space? And like, what kind of differences have you seen with like LARP and VR roleplay?
So that's kind of difficult to answer from my personal perspective because LARP is so many different cultures and so many different groups of people that have their own ways of doing it. When you go from one LARP to another, they might have like entirely different ways of dealing with it. But I guess if you boil it all down, a lot of it comes down to realizing the other person that you've been role playing with is not their character, they're another person, and you need to connect with that person. Uh, that's like what a lot of these mechanics tend to try to do. And some of them are like very simple, of like at the end of like 3 days of role playing this character and like screaming and shouting at some people, is like everyone just like lies down on the floor next to each other and just talks to each other in a big like cuddle puddle sort of thing. You're just like, this person's not that other person. Um, but there are also like a lot of other like more mechanical things, typically like during in session, that some people will use um, to try and like signal like this is like comfortable for me to go further or don't go further. Um, this is not something that I am capable of exploring right now. Um, but to say like see it change, I'm not sure I can because like going from one lab to another is different. I suppose if you are making a stylistic or not style your own what do we call what do you call Couchform actually as a piece of literary
Role play style.
role play style?
I
Thank
think.
you.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
Believe
had
that's
blanked
the.
entirely on it.
Mhm.
it's all good.
But yeah, like if you or if you're making your own role play, you might want to like take a look at like what safety mechanics do and don't fit within your role play, because some of them might be very appropriate and others might actually just get in the way uh, of the role play. So it's kind of difficult to say, really, from my multiple thousands of years in role play.
You know, this is the first I'm hearing of the roleplay cuddle puddle.
I mean, I will say the VR chat community kind of does this. It's a lot less deliberate. A lot of people will come together and like talk about what happened in the session, which is definitely a very positive thing. I'm very for it, but in
But
lab it's
that's not
definitely more.
lying on the ground, and you have to be comfy while doing it. It's very important.
Or being comfy whilst doing it helps a lot.
The comfy
It
debrief.
certainly does. Yeah.
Yeah,
Actually,
see,
one.
go on.
Sorry, go on.
Mhm.
No, you go.
Yeah. So one thing we did as well. I haven't seen too much in this sort of space is deliberate time to get together outside of roleplay and like just communicate and do stuff together. We used to do that a lot in LARPing, especially with Vampire. Obviously, if you don't know, my favorite thing to roleplay is Vampire the Masquerade. If you talk to me about roleplay, I'll inevitably bring it up.
It's true.
So apologies in advance.
It's so true.
We made it all of wow, you made it 40 minutes without saying nothing.
I'm so proud of you, Neil.
I was resisting as much as I could. Shifting in my seat.
Not even an hour.
Whew.
We'll get him next time.
Yeah, a lot of it was just we're gonna go meet up at somebody's house and we're just gonna chill, order lots of like food and pizza, and just talk to each other. This
Yeah.
podcast has gone 0 days without mentioning VTM.
0 days. It's all right.
Reset the counter.
The counter gets well, do we get free days in between all the podcast days? I feel like we shouldn't, right?
I'm just gonna go to your channel every day and talk about VTM, whether you're streaming or not.
Oh my god. Just no context. VTM?
VTM?
Guys, have you heard?
This is related to VTM.
Actually,
silence.
I did want to like comment on just like safety. It doesn't have to be like super serious, I guess, right? Like I guess I've talked about this with a lot of people and have gone either a collection of like affirmatives, people that are really like supportive of the whole kind of need to move toward more safe systems, and then like we've also heard the opposite, people kind of pushing back, saying we don't really need this. The people should handle this themselves, etc. And like I think a lot of that tends to be from a place of like recognizing this as some sort of like extremely always serious sort of framework, when it really can be as simple as like just hanging out on like a non-roleplay night and doing something fun like that.
Yeah.
That is technically part of a safety framework, right? It can be that simple. It can be more intricate, but more than anything, it must be deliberate.
Yeah, I think that's like part of the worry with like safety mechanics of like I'm no longer role playing, instead I'm trying to do this thing and it's going to ruin the role play experience for everyone around me. But you don't need to have all safety mechanics in session. Some of them can certainly be outside and they can be like really easy to engage with. But it's also the other side of that where you workshop beforehand to understand how certain safety mechanics work and when it's appropriate to use certain things. Not, it can get very intensive if you want to, which I recommend for much more involved exploration of very difficult topics, or would be more difficult topics to engage with.
Yeah.
But I would like to see. So I guess the difference between what's currently happening, what I would like to see, is just more deliberate ways of trying to engage your player base with itself as people. Which kind of it kind of does happen. There are a lot of like groups and friend groups and such, but I don't know if there is much there to deliberately go like this space is to decompress from what is has happened, and to properly like talk about the situation that you went through and why it made you uncomfortable and why you want to explore that further. I think having that conversation is probably like what I would like to see more of.
I think speaking of like friends and kind of like friend groups, I do think that brings up a really good point. This is kind of like a thought that I've had on the topic in the past, where like if you really think about it, right? If you have a group of friends that you role play with, the sort of things a group of friends does, things like hanging out together or talking to people a lot, or like checking in on each other, like, those sorts of things that you would probably do in a good group of friends are like the things that safety mechanics are suggesting that you do. And like if you have like a really big role play, right? Like let's say I mean we're talking like 40 plus people, like you have a big role play, lots of people in it. Chances are at a certain size, not everyone's going to be friends with everyone else, right? Even with a smaller role play, you might not have everyone be friends with each other, right? Even worse, you might have some people that are like coming into the space newly and like don't really have friends yet, so they don't really have anyone to support them in that way. So like in that sense, like I think I have heard kind of um different opinions on like whether or not like you need safety mechanics or not, but like it's one of those things where not everyone's going to have the same access to like emotional support structure in the role play. And yes, I'm here calling a friend group a emotional support structure, but but you kind of do, right? Like talking about things kind of helps. It helps a lot when it comes to emotional stuff. And creating a safety culture is really just that. It's just kind of bringing that sort of support that you would have if you were surrounded by a good group of friends, kind of bringing that sort of support to everyone in the game, is part of that. Um, kind of having that friendly environment. Um, yeah, that's kind of part of it. I think it's certainly not the whole
I
picture, but
I think that's actually like a really good analogy is or comparison rather is where like thinking about it in the terms of like what are you comfortable doing with your friends versus a stranger, and one of those things is like you're going to be
mhm.
willing to do much more around your friends than not. And I guess kind of bringing role play from the stranger sort of thing to the friend group sort of stuff. um, I will say a lot of role plays are definitely more treated as the friend group side of things. But as you said, that there's going to be people there who aren't a part of that, and they're going to be very much of the outside and uncomfortable engaging with certain things.
So you've jogged my memory, right? You've now jogged my memory, and we can go full in on this tangent. I'm sure you've heard. I'm sure at least one of you has heard, like in like passing conversation or like whenever people are talking about role play, like someone say something to the lines of, you know, I know them, I've been friends with them for however many years, and so I trust them to do this scene with me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'm sure we've kind of all heard that sentiment, right? And like yeah, that's true, right? Like if you know somebody closely and you're friends with them, then yes, of course, you're probably going to trust them more to behave kind of respectfully and like in a way that you expect in a role play, right? It's just that's just entirely natural, right? um at the same time, it's kind of like it's kind of sad to think about where like if you have like a larger role play, I don't know, it at least saddens me a little bit to think that like um to like be in a space where like I feel like I have to be scared of people that I don't know, like that's kind of a sad picture. And I think like I would love to have similar role play moments with uh as I would with close friends of mine, with people who I'm not really close friends with, and kind of focusing on safety, like making sure everybody's on the same page, bringing people together in that way is a way to bring that to um, allow you to role play in the way that you might with your close friends, with people who are not your close friends. Um, and I think like the frequency of which I've kind of heard this phrase repeated, where like, oh, I had this scene with them because I know them. Like I've heard that phrase or something similar a lot. and kind of like the frequency I've heard that with kind of suggests to me that this is a really big thing to work on.
Mm-hmm. And you said one extremely important word there, which is trust, right? A lot of
Yep.
this, the ability to be able to roleplay with people, which roleplay is a collaborative activity, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The core of how you're able to have these sort of collaborative moments, scenes with people in ways that you have these sorts of back and forths where you want, where you not necessarily expect things to go a certain way, but you can trust them to go in a direction that's interesting. Uh, is once again that word trust, right? And that is not implicit, right? You cannot in any environment expect people to trust each other before they built that. That is just on a very like human level not possible, especially on a large scale. Uh, and a lot of these role plays kind of run on a medium to large scale. So the kind of goal that safety kind of brings into the picture is not necessarily to make people immediately trust each other, but to have tools to kind of build that, to kind of facilitate that building of trust between people, so that they can get to the point where they say where they can say more than just their friends that they trust to go a certain way, but like someone else that they've worked with for long enough to say, yeah, we've gone through these kind of experiences, and I trust them to take things in a certain direction, and that, to a degree, is all you really need in certain moments. And maybe that's the safety is just absolutely geared toward making that a much easier process and a much less bumpy process, because it, especially when you have uh, the lack of safety systems, you can butt heads quite a bit uh, on like thresholds for the kind of things people want to explore. Because if you don't have that, the person, especially effectively the person who is able to explore the most, kind of sets the bar for everyone else, right? And that can be a bit tumultuous for a lot of people. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the person with kind of the highest or like the highest limits there. Um, I think I would be willing to accept that maybe there are like some people like there are probably some people who like genuinely just might be resilient enough that they don't need safety mechanics, but that's like certainly not universal, and like certainly not even close to a majority of people. Um, like I think there are a few people that when they say that they're okay with everything, they might be actually telling the truth. But I think okay with everything does like usually carry with it still kind of like an implicit, well, everything that I think that you will end up doing, sort of. Um, like I don't think you will go far enough that I will need anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
That's something I've run into in a few times, where someone's like, "Oh, I'm okay with this sort of thing," but safety mechanics, you using them specifically, aren't always just for you. I've seen people who have put themselves in positions where they're like physically hurting themselves. And they're like, "I'm okay with this. It helps me have more immersion." It's like, but I'm not okay witnessing this. This is quite upsetting for me. So having
oh my
having those
god.
mechanics there for that is like for other people is also important.
I and I suppose not even just the players. I'm not gonna lie. Um, I've been pretty good in role plays. I don't think I think I've maybe had like maybe like one situation in a role play where like I felt like okay, maybe I should have had like a where like I felt uncomfortable, like maybe like one, maybe two situations in the past like 3 years, right? um when I was jamming in Worlds Apart, I'll have you know that we were kind of like sitting there, like not in the role play, right? Because GMs are usually kind of like separate from the role play, and I was like constantly worried like about how players were doing, and the knowledge that like I couldn't really check in on anybody like without interrupting their scene, like that was actually like possibly one of the most stressful situations I've been in, like more stressful than like I've been in like a literal like execution scene, and not actually being in role play but just watching it, right, kind of like organizing it, was more stressful than that, specifically because um we didn't really have those safety mechanics in play. And like in that sense, right, like watching a scene, like if you're watching a scene, it's not just the topic of your scene could make someone else uncomfortable. That also happens, but it's like somebody watching a scene might be unsure that the people in that scene are okay, and that uncertainty, right, that uncertainty of not knowing whether those people are okay who are in the scene can also make people uncomfortable, and like very much so.
There is a there was a note about safety that I saw that kind of, I think we also ended up writing it in the principle that we kind of expanded upon safety with. So it is kind of a preface thing for I guess a later podcast topic. But the passage that I read was effectively that like while the safety mechanics themselves may not immediately provide like the full amount of benefit that you would expect, uh, if even if they don't, the presence and the thought put into building a community of and a culture of safety and essentially showing that you care about the well-being of people before their need to portray characters uh, is enough in and of itself to create a community where people feel that they can trust each other more easily. So just the presence of the system itself and actually workshopping safety techniques shows that showrunners care about the players and the players care about each other, and that alone is enough to kind of help alleviate those sorts of like concerns of like are things going wrong around me. If you know that there are tools in place, it's a lot easier to kind of say, well, uh, it's much more likely that they have the capability to be able to calibrate this situation if they are in distress, so I don't have to worry about it as much.
Hmm. Yeah. Suppose this might be a somewhat like reductive take. I mean, maybe a little bit more reductive than I like to be usually, but it's kind of like the idea that by projecting, like if you're a player in a role play, or kind of like you're an organizer in a role play, by projecting that you care about other people's safety, and not just talking about it, but like actually doing it, right, like by showing other people that you care about their safety, is kind of like you can prove to each other in a sense that you're looking out for each other's best interest. That makes it easier to trust. On the flip side, if like you have somebody in a role play that just like flat out refuses to engage in the safety mechanics, um, I mean, I can think of like a couple of reasons that could be, but like that aren't necessarily malicious, but like generally, right, it's kind of like the idea where there might theoretically be some like this is like the theoretical bad apples that you're trying to suss out from your community, right? Like there might theoretically be some people who are unsafe to have in your community, um, and if you have a culture of safety, right, if the sort of the role play is kind of built around this culture of safety, where you kind of do the work to prove to each other that you're working in everybody's best interest, well, you have one of two things. Well, either bad apples remove themselves from that community, right? They kind of see themselves out the door, or they are forced to care about other people, right? Because if they don't, then they're essentially removing themselves. So it kind of just like, and, this is hypothetical bad apples, right? I don't actually think like personally, I think that pretty much almost everyone, like almost all the time, is acting in a way where they do actually care about other people, right? But it's scary when you don't know somebody else, right? That's potentially scary, and that's like when you don't know somebody, you don't know that they do that for sure. So that's kind of what the safety systems are there to help bridge, is that gap when you don't know somebody.
Mhm. So I wanted to reiterate a point you said, another really important one. This is something that we kind of share as a belief, is that safety can absolutely address a lot of very like fundamentally distressing things and distressing moments that people feel and that people experience. But it is very, very, very rarely the case that someone acts maliciously to do this and create these sort of situations. Almost always, we run under the assumption that people are acting in good faith and within the interests of either their own experience or the experience of those around them. And the reason why safety is necessary in that sort of framework where people are already acting non maliciously is because they have different ways of doing so. Uh, and those different ways of kind of interacting with others and kind of uh, engaging with the content of the roleplay and with each other as participants in the roleplay uh, can kind of create these sort of like dissonant situations because everyone's different, right? Everyone has different experiences, handles things differently, which is why it's always good to kind of have those systems that allow us to kind of ground ourselves a little bit and to recognize that we're all different and to see these experiences for what they are.
And with that, I think this is like the perfect segue into the next point on the list, which is clear communication, as like uh, one of the solutions to different people kind of coming with different expectations, or coming to the table with different expectations.
Yeah.
Because that is, I would agree. I think like that is maybe like the number one sort of like source of conflict and disappointment, and like um arguments are if you have like two people and they're kind of talking past each other, where one person expects one thing and the other person expects something else, and you don't talk about it, and you just kind of expect the other person to do the thing that you're used to, but then they don't do it because you're different people and you have different sort of experiences and different expectations going into the role play. Um, you know, you could say different role play styles even. Um, and if a lot of people, I think actually VR chat role play is, or at least the small bubble that we occupy, is relatively homogenous in like the grand scheme of things. But even within this like relatively homogenous bubble, like there are definitely like distinct role play styles. There, I think there are definitely like different groups of people who enjoy role playing in different ways, and I think everybody's really just doing the sorts of things that is fun for them. But if you don't, then if you meet with a different group that does things differently from the way that you do, that can also be uncomfortable. If and the way to make that not uncomfortable is to, well, talk with each other and have clear communication about the sort of things that you like and the sort of things that you don't like.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely been within a good amount of situations where communicating ideas would have just completely alleviated issues. But entire like kind of falling outs where like had the thing just been talked about earlier, it's like, well, this could have been fully prevented, right? Like you had ideas for this roleplay that you wanted to run this certain way. If you had just talked about those, then it would have been easy. Uh, there was actually a funny instance within our contributors. Actually, we have like a little section within the myriad for when we were building Couchform and then talking through different topics. And there was a point at which 404 specifically brought up the using the Socratic method, right? Like ask questions about what the other person's talking about to help yourself kind of understand how they're approaching it. Because we as human beings frame things within our own point of view and understanding of the world uh, and whatever we're engaging with. So, like, if I see someone type something and interpret it in my own way, and it's not like the interpretation that the person intended, and suddenly we're already in a mismatch, right? That's a failure of communication if we continue on that. So, like, in the spirits of making sure we're communicating on the same level, it's sometimes good to just say, "Is this what you meant?" Right? Is this what you're getting at? And there were actually some conversations within the contributors kind of channels where we had to kind of employ that quite a bit, and it was extremely helpful to kind of have that basis of like thinking first. How do I understand what the other person's thinking before I start saying my part? And then it's very easy to go from there.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I can also start kind of talking about this on a larger scale too. In the context of like assumptions, right? I kind of mentioned this earlier on my reason why, or I guess reasons why, why I started with Couchform. But one of those is like looking at how many of these stylistic choices were unspoken, right? So like ways that people could get involved with roleplay became a lot more difficult the more community knowledge was like kind of amassed, right? People would kind of start to make this like mountain of assumptions about the things they were doing in roleplay that would end up leading into this like you have to be there long enough to build this pattern sort of vibe within basically any roleplay group that you enter. And I would see a lot of like kind of newer people struggle with like, well, how do I roleplay? And maybe a lot of people would think like, oh, it's easy. You just hop in, you just put on your avatar, and you go in and you just play your character. But it's very much not that easy, right? It's we're kind of in a frame of mind of having made so many like acknowledgments and assumptions about like starting roleplay and then like learning about it and then continuing with it and finding our own style that like when we have someone new that comes in without any of that, it's hard for us to like recognize what that position is. So like the importance of communication there, the way I see it, is like we find that sort of like baseline of assumptions that we're making that we can kind of recognize and then just like separate those out, like analytically separate those out from like what our usual thoughts are and then like put those somewhere, like lay those out in the open so that people can kind of consume that and understand it, and then hopefully bring people into a more shared understanding of like what the role play is.
Yeah, I
Oh
think
man.
we
go
have
ahead.
all. I think we've all come across like an instance of like there's a mechanic or something that there's a clearly a way that it wants to be engaged with, but we have no clue how to do that, and nowhere has that been written or expressed in any way. And like asking people is it seems like so obvious to them that they don't know how to explain it. I feel like that can be like a common thing that comes up a lot of that. We need to be like better prepared to communicate these ideas.
Yeah.
I actually have two very specific examples. One from when I was first joining roleplay, and then one from like literally like 2 days ago. Um, um, I'll start from when I was first joining roleplay. I can no longer call myself new. You know, I've been here for I guess almost 3 years. But you know, when I was first joining roleplay, um, kind of the first roleplay I was in, I heard people talking a lot about this concept of like roleplay etiquette, right? And well, being new, you know, being like having literally just started roleplay like less than a month ago at the time, I was like, okay, what is good roleplay etiquette? And I actually like asked a lot of different people. I asked like probably at least 20 good people like what roleplay etiquette is, or what good roleplay etiquette is. And I actually did not get a single answer. The closest thing that I got to an answer was what is not good roleplay etiquette. You know, things like, you know, sneaking up behind people and backstabbing them is an example of like not good roleplay etiquette, right? Don't do that. And funnily enough, it was mostly combat related, right? Don't metagame. That was another thing. That was a don't do this, right? Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do stuff, right? But I never did I get a single affirmative answer of what is good roleplay etiquette. And I think that's just because it's kind of an unspoken rule. People know it when they see it, which, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, for people that have been there for a while, it works completely fine, right? Like sort of unspoken rules. That's just what a culture is, right? Like theoretically, if you had like a safety culture in your role play, you know, that would also there would also probably be some unspoken rules there, right? um, it is dangerous, however, when all your rules are unspoken and you know none of it is written down or like explicit, because then anyone who hasn't been there since the beginning is just going to be completely lost, with absolutely no way of figuring out what to do. In this case, you know, what's good role play etiquette? Well, you know, heck if I know. Um, but like, I did mention I also have another example from like literally 2 days ago. I was talking to somebody who is now new to role play, and they were going through the lore channel of they were going through the lore channel of a role play, and they were under the impression that they had to memorize like every single like thing in the lore channel of the role play. And let me tell you, there is a lot of information in the lore channel of this role play, and that is not at all the expectation. In fact, the expectation, I think, like probably the average player knows like none of the stuff that's in the channel, but or maybe like only the stuff that's relevant to their character is the only lore that they know, and that's kind of like another unspoken rule, right? Like most role plays that have a lot of role or lore, it's kind of an unspoken rule that, well, generally, if you're creating a new character, you go over the lore that's relevant to your character, and you absolutely don't need to memorize literally all the history of the entire world all the time, right? Um, but if it's not written down, right? If that's not written down and you just have a lore channel that just has a very long info dump and you're there as a new person, you have no idea what's important and what's not important, right? Um, so you go and read everything, and everything is a lot when you're absolutely not expected to go through everything.
I had a very recent experience of reading through a very long lore channel and all of the kind of getting started pages of a roleplay. Getting through all of that, recognizing how much information it is, and having skimmed through the whole thing. And then realizing I don't even know where the roleplay takes place. It feels like one of those really simple things, right? But it's like it just wasn't talked about. Like, where am I role playing? What's the set? What's the immediate setting? And it's like, either there's like a forced assumption to make, or you just find out when you get into the session, or it's just something that kind of that people forgot to write down. But it is just one of those things, right? Like whenever you think about like people just getting into roleplay, you gotta think about like what do people need to know to get started? How do they make a character that fits the setting, that fits the themes that are being aimed for with the roleplay, and what is the direction that the roleplay is going in? Is there anything I need to know? What do I need to read up on? Like those are all kind of questions that like I find that people very commonly have when they're looking at a roleplay, and like if there's already a lot to go through, then it's like, well, I can't parse through all of this and memorize everything because that would be a lot to ask of any person. But like, what do I need to know? What's important here?
How would you, as a showrunner, determine what's important to tell your players and not tell your players? Like, what would be the essentials to let them know what they should, in order to better roleplay in your space?
Trial and error. No,
God.
I have I have learned that okay, this is a hard question to answer. I think like the general kind of very core necessities for a player is a knowing the place that they're role playing in. So like the immediate area, what the map actually is, right? Like it's this town situated in here. This is what you would know about it as a baseline. Like that's very core, right? Understanding what type of roleplay it is. So like the tone of the roleplay. Is it like somber, dramatic? Is it like lighthearted and full of like bit comedy? Because you can very immediately have some issues with like players coming in looking for something that's more heavy drama and then realizing that's not what this is, right? This is more dynamic. This is more like scene by scene episodic kind of stuff. um, and I guess depending on the role play, you can also think about like, well, what kind of themes are you exploring, right? You can have the same setting and tone and explore very different things. uh, so I think like I would aim for those three. But what I've been doing recently is like aiming for a little bit more than that, just to like see if people ask questions and what kind of questions they ask. Because I feel like this is something that you get more of a handle on as you like build the thing out. Because there's a lot of things you can only learn by actually like building and running something, right? And that can kind of inform like since I have that feedback and people are asking these questions, now I can kind of bring that back into the process, and hopefully that'll kind of make everyone's lives easier.
I'm gonna add one thing to that as like I think that kind of works as like a bare minimum. See, I'm usually on the side of like share more rather than less.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there is some point where it becomes too much. Honestly, if I think that I think if you feel like the information that you have is too much to share with the players, um, I think the response to that isn't don't share it. It's you have too much information, right? Um, that's like I suppose the first part of my opinion here. But I guess the second part, something that I would add there, is I found in my experience this sort of like designer's intent or like author's intent is like really helpful. Like instead of just having like giving people like a big dump of like information of like, well, here's what we're doing, really short, right? Like literally like a sentence on like why, right? Like, why did we make the choices that we did? Um, can be really helpful because that somebody might like misread or like misunderstand the what, but if you also accompany it with the why, then it becomes a lot easier to interpret like, well, what does any of this mean? um you can kind of say that like, you could have your like humongous like encyclopedia of like world building and lore and be like, wow, this is super cool. But then you could also say where like, but the why, if you include the why, which is like, okay, I as a designer have most of this is here just for me in case like it becomes relevant, and these parts are the ones that I think the role play is really about. Um, right, like you can just include that sort of like commentary, and then um, instead of leaving players to figure out or like parse your huge encyclopedia of lore, you could tell them, well, hey, focus on these parts, right? These are the parts that I think are the most important to this role play. um, and like I think that's quite helpful. And of course, it's probably going to change over time. Like author's intent is not going to mean much after the role play begins, because players are going to change how things work just naturally over time. But it's not so much of a you have to do things this way. It's just kind of like a signpost in the correct direction, like a signpost in a direction rather, so that all the different people who are going to read your guidelines are hopefully going to be able to go like in a similar direction to each other rather than going in entirely different directions.
Yeah. And speaking of things to focus on and going in a similar
Yep.
direction, what a great
Yep.
segue.
What a great segue. Oh my goodness. It's like I didn't set it up on purpose or anything.
It's like it was right there.
Yeah.
You cast out the lion and I bit. My God.
Yeah.
So I will say before I
You talk about
segue,
how backstory is the most important part to share with
yes,
other characters.
yes. So you have to have secrets. No, I'm just playing. I'm just playing. Don't hate me. Don't hate me. We'll talk about that one in 8 episodes.
8 episodes.
Secrets?
Well,
No,
let's
that's
see.
never mind. That's number 11.
So it depends. I think it depends on like how long we talk, like how much because we're already like jumping a little bit back and forth.
Yeah.
Pardon while I lore dump.
I'll have my
Boy.
character is the prince of I don't know. I was trying to make up. I can't do names. I was trying to make up a fantasy town. I've already failed.
Say
This is-
say a
failed at the
real
lore dump.
city,
The
and
crown
then you're
prince of
vampire, the masquerade adjacent.
the crown prince of the Von Floor Kingdom.
There you go.
I wouldn't know anything about that. Anyways, so I will say 2 things before we segue into the first core principle of Couchform. We do have 3 other things listed within the essentials, and that is ethical considerations, technical knowledge of VR, and a clear statement of purpose. Those I think we don't really need to expand on too much. At least not much more than we already have, because I think we've kind of touched on a couple of those already in some detail. But they are listed for the sake of clarity. And the second thing I wanted to kind of just pitch out there is Kurlon's about to lord though. No, I wanted to kind of remind everyone that is watching, whether in the stage channel, in the Mira Discord, or in the stream chat, you are perfectly open to pitch some questions our way if you want any of us to expand upon something or answer, or you have some sort of other burning question that you want to ask us. You are free to do so at any point, and we'll try to find some time to get around to them and talk about them.
Yep.
All right. So, with that being said, I'm going to very slowly walk over to the first principle of Couchform, while I allow some deliberate space for any potential questions that might arise while I'm walking over to the first principle of Couchform, while Selen holds her breath for the entire time that I'm walking over to the first principle
don't.
of Couchform.
Quick. Either
Okay.
ask a question or
Okay.
walk faster because I'm gonna drown.
Did you drown? Oh,
Still
no.
holding my breath.
I'm kind of hungry.
They're throwing me into the water. Help.
Oh no, this is salt water. I can't go in here. No.
Blah 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 blah.
Slowly walking. We now reach the portion on explain RP. Oh no. All right.
I
think you can breathe now.
I think we can just
Yeah.
talk about it. We
Yeah.
can themes. Woo.
Themes. Okay. So,
Simmies.
Couchform's number one core principle, and the thing that we revolve this entire style around, is focus on the theme. So what that means to us is that we formulate some sort of idea, some sort of foundational idea to revolve the entire roleplay around. And so what does that mean, right? Like when we have a theme in the context of Couchform, we ask the question, what kind of moral, emotional, or philosophical issue would characters argue about? As we believe conflict is drama, right? When you have differences of opinions, you find the character development that you kind of look for in these kind of longer form things. So the question there, what you would answer that with, is the theme of the roleplay. It is the central idea that everything revolves around. And when you build characters, you build them with by representing unique perspectives on that theme. Because otherwise they would add nothing to the structure that you are basing around this theme. And then after that, you build by kind of confronting these characters with conflict and plot that kind of challenges their perspective on the theme and forces them to make decisions about that. Which, depending on how the character then responds to those, creates this sort of like meaningful change, whether they kind of stick to their guns or they realize something about themselves and kind of change within the context of these like thematic issues, right? And so our kind of basis on this is if you put a thematically diverse group of characters into a thematically relevant situation, that alone is already a very strong foundation for a story. And you can kind of build drama around that.
I think it's very important to address before we continue that the word theme, this is more like a language thing, the word theme has like a really nebulous definition in the English language. Like practically everybody uses it to mean like different things. Like I swear I have heard in like response to like what the theme of like a certain story is, like I swear I've heard people say, well it's like sci-fi themed or something, or it's like fantasy themed, cyberpunk themed, and this is just like the nature of language, different words mean different things to different people. And theme, I suppose, is a very big offender of this because, oh boy, is there like no consistent definition of that word. But we specifically here are using it to mean something or we're specifically having it with a very particular definition, which is that the theme of a role play is an idea. Rather, it's not like a visual aesthetic. It's specifically an idea that your role play revolves around and your role play explores and answers. Yes, it's not. It's not definitely not dark theme on your computer. That's you know that that's certainly something else.
See,
But yeah, I suppose with that out of the way, I guess we
Well,
can get back to talking
I
about
guess what I've been using as a term for this is narrative themes. What are your narrative themes of your roleplay?
Mhm.
To try and move people away from using those as their descriptors for theme.
Yeah, like we kind of mentioned this earlier, right? But like the way I see the equivalence of this in our perspective is what is the role play about, and that again is like kind of an easy, or I guess a more directed way to kind of approach the aim that we have for theme, right? And I guess on that tangent note, if you use light mode, why? I just want to know. Do you enjoy burning your retinas?
it's like weight training.
It's weird.
I don't
What kind of
I
muscles?
don't use
do-
I don't use
Wait,
light mode. I don't use light mode.
just
Trying
devil's
to absorb
advocate.
more light so I can
Yeah,
eventually
no,
one
you
day stare at the sun.
You switch back and forth between light mode and dark mode to exercise the muscles that contract your pupils.
You see that as a
There you
joke,
go.
but I'm sure there's probably someone out there that does this. You got
Oh boy.
8 billion people on this planet. At least one of them probably fully believes that's actually training their eyes.
Feels like some cult behavior.
We need some research on this.
Kurlon's pupils can crush soda cans. Oh my god. Okay. How can we make a roleplay around that? We'll think about that as we continue on this topic.
Oh.
So, we have further writing on this principle, and our kind of vision of the GM in this framework, because realistically, another thing that's nebulous is the role of a GM. It is very dependent on style, and the way that we envision it is that the GM, their primary role is that they are the keeper of the theme, and that is it. In Couchform, the GM is no more or less than the keeper of the theme. And when I actually wrote this, I recognized that that phrase alone is incredibly vague and would basically have to be interpreted. And that's actually the goal. One of the primary goals of these Couchform principles is that like we will make some of these like really strong assumptions, or not assumptions, assertions, about various aspects of roleplay and the way that we would like to see them done. And in some cases, we will make things interpretable, so that they can be built upon and explored more, and kind of made into these like or kind of creatively used, right? And that this is one of those things, right? Like, what does it mean to be the keeper of the theme for a GM? What kind of things does a GM have to do to do that? There can be any number of answers to that, and I think that's kind of one of the kind of fun strengths that I feel like Couchform really has.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, every role play. Okay, maybe not every role play, but you know, probably most role plays are going to have different themes from each other. And so, like, you know, if you have two role plays that have different themes, then it doesn't really make much sense for the GMs to be doing exactly the same things, right? Because it's two different role plays. So, I mean, those two different role plays are going to have different needs that need to be met, or like the theme, I suppose, is going to have different needs that needs to be met to be realized.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, no two role plays are built equal.
So I have been dealing with themes for a little while in roleplay, and oh gosh, do you ever just like have a moment where your brain just ejects all information?
No.
Oh, I just had
Never.
one of those moments. Oh, okay. No, it's just me.
Never. Yep,
Just me.
just you. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I've
Themes.
been dealing with themes for a while, and right, reset the counter. But VTM talks quite a bit about like using themes in their role plays. One of these books is Hunters Hunted, where you play the vampire hunters, and I think it has a pretty good paragraph on themes, explaining what you kind of want to. Maybe I'll just read it, and then we'll figure out what I'm trying to say afterwards. You know, like ad hoc it sort of thing.
Okay.
But yeah, so what it says here is many of the best stories cleave to a specific and central theme, infusing it into every word. Sticking to a theme isn't strictly necessary, but it can help even the smallest scenes resonate by giving you something to fall back on narratively. You may already have a theme in mind going to your story, which case more power to you. However, authors don't discover the theme of a novel until well into our second or third draft. As a storyteller, you don't have a second draft, but may find common grounds amongst your players' characters, antagonists, plots, and all of the above as you go. So I guess what it's saying here is like there is the idea like themes are going to pop up in your roleplay that you don't intend, and like things are gonna change the direction of stuff in the way where you didn't expect. As they say in LARP, is no plan ever survives meeting the players. But it is also really useful to go in with a theme in mind, like a particular direction with this. Because I mean, like the first thing with like theme that I find really useful is it puts everybody on the same page. Everybody knows which direction we're all heading in, so we can all make characters around that have maybe not like an in-character reason to go talk to each other, but when we do start talking, we have things that we can talk about, and we know the other person's going to have a response to it. Quite often, those responses are probably going to lean more towards the end of the dramatic end of things.
Yeah, and I guess this actually is a good segue to the question that was just posed by Kurlon, which actually in itself requires another definition, which I will not make, and I'm going to say why in a bit. But he asks, does the expectation of a theme to evoke some level of conflict preclude Couchform from being applicable to social RPs? So the definition that I'm pointing at, which has been put in quotes very deliberately, is social. So I am of the belief that every roleplay is almost entirely social. So the determination of social here, I think, really has a really strong cultural context. Like, from what I understand of the Metaverse's definition of social, it basically means no disruptive events or very few disruptive events, which effectively is just like, your basic like kind of combat encounter or thing threatening the setting. Is basically you expect there to be no major threats to the general flow of social activity. That being said, the definition. I guess I won't like just stick with that definition, because I think like there's a lot of different kinds of like degrees of sociability that a roleplay can have. What I will say is on the topic of conflict. The way that I view conflict is in the very literary sense, in that conflict, rather than like being an actual like fight or an argument or something violent, is like in the very literary sense a thing that evidences disagreement between characters. And it could be anything. It doesn't even have to necessarily result in. It doesn't actually. Let me backtrack a little bit. It doesn't even have to be between characters. It evidences a difference in perspective, right? Like something like a signpost can create a conflict for a character based on what they believe, right? Like if you to bring up like a real life example, like say you're kind of driving on the street and you see a signpost that someone has put up that says something controversial, that at least that you feel is controversial, and then you like feel something about that. You feel some sort of like passion to like talk about why you disagree with what the signpost says. And you have suddenly, like in the literary sense, found a conflict with something that's not another character, even. Uh, these kind of situations, at a very basic level, uh, force characters to make decisions about things. And it's not necessarily to say that you need them to be like um, these dramatic progressions. Even like the lightest role plays possible have some sorts of conflicts that aren't necessarily like life or death or these like big dramatic things, but could just be as simple as like, you know, I don't have a ride to college anymore. Oh no, what am I gonna do? Well, I guess I have to ride a bike, right? And then the character then arrives to the campus, all like, you know, tuckered out, just heavy breathing because they've been biking up a hill for like 20 miles, and it's just like this kind of thing that like it is a conflict technically. That is a conflict, and the decision that they made says something about the character. You could just like frame just about anything that forces a character to decide something as a conflict because it evidences something about the character. And that's like kind of what we're aiming at is like when we think about the expectation of this theme, uh, for us specifically, we're looking at like uh, things between characters for Couchform, which characters already have perspectives on. So even in the kind of like lighthearted social roleplay sort of sense, uh, and we can kind of like develop themes around that, and then experiences around that, that then have characters decide things between each other. And you never really have to delve into this like heavily dramatic take on it. That does tend to be the direction for a lot of role players that I've found. Uh, but there are definitely ways that you can just kind of not push into like these like really heavy topics, and it's very there's a lot of topics that are just like not heavy. It's actually like I find a lot harder to to list out more heavy topics than there are light topics. I think it's just one of those things that we kind of zero in on because we're like perhaps used to the more dramatic stuff.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I also have a take on this. I do. I fully agree with you, Solace. Like, I would also reject, I suppose, using social roleplay, or I think more commonly like social lobby, as like this distinction in roleplay for the same reason, right? Like roleplay is kind of inherently social, unless I suppose you're doing one of those weird experimental solo role plays. Um, but that's like, you know, the pretty much everything that people like, pretty much almost everything that people do in VR is social, with like maybe some like minor exceptions where like somebody like essentially plays their character going through a thing alone, right? Like that might be an example of something that's not social. But that's usually as a part of a bigger role play that is fundamentally social, right? Um, what I think the specific metaverse term, social lobby, is usually used to refer to a lobby in which characters can kind of go and like hang out, and there's an expectation that there's nothing going to stop you from just hanging out, right? Usually, the main thing that's going to stop you from hanging out is combat roleplay, and these two things are generally at odds with each other. But that's the way in which it's normally used. It's kind of like a sort of space where characters can hang out with each other. In that sense, you know, the metaverse social lobbies aren't too dissimilar from another type of role play called light role play, and the main distinction is that there's still an expectation, even though it's kind of like lighthearted and you're kind of hanging out. There is still an expectation that you're in character for the whole time. So anyway, even when we're talking about those types of role plays, right? Like kind of like a lighthearted hanging out, that still doesn't necessarily preclude conflict. Um, I don't know too much sort of like literary theory, but like I do vaguely remember, there are like different types of story conflicts. Like I'm sure you've seen the person versus person, person versus society, person versus self, person versus nature, person, that sort of thing, right? Um, Two people fighting, especially, two people like physically fighting, is like a really, 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 really specific type of conflict in like the wide sea of like different types of conflict that you could have. Um, and like, I know that VR chat roleplay tends to be very combat heavy in the sense where it's, characters do a lot of physical fighting. But like as far as stories go, there's a wide sea of like different types of conflicts that can be taken part of, um, that don't have to include characters being not even opposed to each other, right? Like if you have a sort of a group of like friends and like one friend is being consoled because they're crying, well, like presumably they're crying over something, and like they're probably like that character is probably going through something. They're probably in a conflict with themselves over something, right? Um, and like internal conflict is also like a very valid angle to take, or you could you could you could explore how a certain group of characters are in conflict with their broader society. Um, and in that case, right, like the group of characters that are being in the role play are all aligned, and they might all agree with each other, but there's like an idea that they are a part of a broader society, and you can role play that out as well. So like in nowhere in Couchform does does that exclude sort of social lobbies, and I'll say social lobbies because once again I reject using social role play here as a classification. But I suppose there are certain types of role plays that might be precluded from Couchform, but that's because it's a style, right? And there are going to be different role plays with different styles. So like I suppose there is no badge of honor for a role play being a Couchform role play, right? It's not so much of a badge of honor. It's just like an arbitrary distinction that we have decided to make. Um, you know, so I guess that you know I've tried to answer the question there, but also um, answer the fact that I suppose the premise of the question is kind of like the idea that a role play being precluded from being couch form is not really, I guess, good or bad in any way, because it's just like a label, you know. Um, yeah.
It is a
I
label of a style.
I wouldn't mind going back a few points to
Mhm.
to conflict and such. Like, I wanted to delve a little bit further into that, like almost like why do we want conflict and such, which I guess can be like a very personal and very
Oh, we're already
subjective sort of
jumping
reason.
ahead.
Oh, we're jumping ahead.
Oh,
We no, let's talk about it.
Oh,
That's topic number 5, but or
topic number 5. Oh boy.
yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
yeah, it's embrace conflict. Number 5, embrace conflict.
oh, so yeah. Well, I say what I want to say then, but
Okay, go ahead, go
yeah,
ahead.
go for it.
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing that I really get out of roleplaying, and one of the things that I
Hmm.
love to do, is to explore something and learn more about myself and my beliefs, and I guess the beliefs of people around me out of character. as well, um, which is why I really like delving into uncomfortable themes and such. Also, why I'm a big advocate of safety mechanics and such. But that, I guess, like to define conflict really is what I guess I'm trying to do here. And for me, like, conflict is the discussion either internally or with someone else about a particular topic or theme, and trying to find a resolution, or find different perspectives on a certain thing, or experience it from different perspectives. Um, and I think that is best done through um, arguing. And also, arguing doesn't necessarily have to mean like shouting at each other or disagreeing directly, but a communication with um, I'm trying not to say it. I'm really trying not to.
You're doing great.
But it's like a what do I believe? Or I guess, what do I believe? What does my character believe? What does your character believe? And what do you believe? Um, and what can we take away from this? Um, and that's what I find the value of conflict in.
Yeah, like the form of conflict that we're effectively looking for is like exploration. Uh, and that's kind of the focus of like why we want to have this sort of like central theme is like something to explore around. This is like when I ask, and I've asked this question a lot recently, is like, what do you want to explore with your character? Like themes can also be kind of character scale, right? Like what kind of things are you exploring with this character? Uh, is I've noticed it's a very hard question for a lot of people to answer, and it's also been very hard for me in like building characters nowadays too. But it is very much like one of those things that you can kind of understand beforehand to give yourself kind of a guide on like what direction you want to take the character in, and that in a very similar way to what is the roleplay about is like asking what is the character about, like what is your aim for your experience and exploration with this character in this setting.
That is exactly how I make characters. Is I start off with the thing that I want to explore, find out what the themes are of the roleplay, what is it trying to explore and like help find the answers of, and um, typically what I'll do is have a character that has an answer to one of these questions, and or I guess like a personal answer. These work very well if they're subjective. Oh, pardon me, but having that character like hold this view, typically a different view than I would personally hold, and then in roleplay I have a direction. I know what I want to push for, and since this question is being asked to every character, if you're using themes, um, we're gonna have a conversation about it, because I would assume they also have an opinion on this question as well, what their character does. So I tend to not even like bother with backstories that much.
Yep.
It's the most important part is answering, or like this gosh, I'm really bad with words today. Oh boy.
Believe me, you got this.
I got this. I got this. VTM.
Fuck.
Yes.
Or reset the counter.
Reset the count.
It was what, an hour 10 minutes, an hour 13.
Something like that.
Oh my god, we made it so far.
Oh boy, I've been sweating this entire time, not saying it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, but that's like what's important. That's like the most important thing for a character, is having an answer to that question, or just trying to explore it, not having an answer and coming up with one at the end of the roleplay, or partway through.
or even like don't come up with the answer like that. That I find to be like super interesting. I realize like my own approach actually has been kind of this the entire time, and I just haven't like recognized it. That like I appreciate thinking of a character thematically and what they can question about others before I think about the character's backstory and like what they've specifically experienced and like what they can do. Because a lot of people I find focus on what the character can do before what they are. But like when I recognize that, I guess I'll talk on my experience as Rowan in Warp, right? Like I recognized my style and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna make this character almost entirely from like a thematic perspective. Um, it was effectively like the representation of a society that effectively like suppresses or is suppressed by an entirely different society. It is kind of held within this bubble, and it's the experience of like being totally okay with it and having everything they want because they don't really want much. They're perfectly fine with the position they're in. This people has like a wildly inflated and unstable currency. Their lives are planned out from like day negative 10,000, right? They have like projects from decades in advance, but like their lives are otherwise idyllic. They get everything they want because like they don't really want much. So playing that character was very much an exploration of like, is this a bad thing? Like, because we in kind of our modern society would view that as like, these people are being controlled. This is awful. We need to save them. But the answer that I had for that within creating the character was specifically that actually happened, that he was quote unquote saved from this exact position in society. And he didn't like it. None of the people that were saved with him liked it. It was effectively this band of people that thought they knew better saying, we're saving you from captivity or from like oppression. And these people were like, no, like you're not doing that. Put us back where we came from. Or so help me, right? And that was like the big like overarching thing that ended up defining how this character kind of interacted with the rest of the cast. That a lot of them would kind of have this sort of the core question of Warp ended up being kind of around free will and whether kind of the ability to predetermine things should force people to kind of run a predetermined life in society. And building my character with like the admittedly very rare perspective that it's like perfectly fine and honestly the best case scenario to be predetermined. Again, modern society says you generally want people to have the freedom to choose things. And that's like most of our modern cultures are very much in favor of that, especially looking toward like kind of progressivism, right? But my character was like the very passive representation of like this is what happens when that goes awry, right? When people take the question of free will and impose it on others, and what that means for the people who were perfectly fine where they were at, and how those people can get displaced, and what kind of normal that they can find after that in a place that isn't home. Like, how does he make home? And realistically, at the end of the roleplay, there were not enough answers to those questions that would constitute a full resolution. My character still ended up in this position of like having made a couple strides, but still not arriving to all the answers that he was looking for. And I found that to be like amazing for where the roleplay kind of ended, because like the culmination of the 6 months was that like there was this sort of like exchange where these UN characters that were essentially visiting this world were kind of like funneling out. Some of them were staying, some of them were leaving. Some of the fantasy world outro characters were also leaving, and it was this kind of like goodbye and hello to like other experiences kind of vibe. But at the end of it, like the world moves on, but he's still kind of in this inner conflict, and I found that to be really like poetic on like what I was planning to do with the character. It perfectly made sense that not all those questions were answered at the end.
I might actually like poke at that a little bit because you said earlier that kind of the question of free will was the main theme of Worlds Apart,
Uh-huh.
and I don't entirely disagree. It was certainly, I think, maybe the strongest theme in that role play, but I don't really know if we had a main theme. Because like if you look through all the documentation, right, like nowhere in any of that did we say that, this is a role play about like, questions about free will, right? And I suppose that was like part of the design of that role play. Certainly, that role play predates Couchform. I mean, some of some of the ideas are kind of like starting to get there, but like I don't think we really set out to have a core theme. And I think I think that kind of reflected in kind of how the roleplay turned out. Certainly, once again, this question of like free will and like, what does that mean? And then like, what does that mean to the people of Alice? And also, what does that mean to, um, the United Nations, where like, science is all about, trying to do the impossible and like predicting the future. Um, so like certainly I think that was like the strongest theme of the roleplay, and therefore by virtue of being the strongest theme, it kind of took over a lot of the roleplay. But it certainly wasn't core in the sense that we definitely did not like, broadcast that like, hey, this is the theme, right? Like there were certainly lots of parts of that roleplay that were not directed at that.
Mm.
So in that sense, um, and also, right, I suppose like, having GM for that role play, I do like I kind of have heard different accounts from different people, and some people felt like very disconnected from parts of the role play, and like at some points like people felt that there were like multiple different role plays going on at the same time, like within Worlds Apart, and I think one of the like causes of that is that while we did have like definitely a very strong theme, it wasn't like actually core to the design, right? Like it was intentional, right? There was intentional themes there, but it wasn't like, hey, this is the main theme of our role play, right? Um,
Mm.
I believe when we pitched the role play, it was very much about, some the meeting of two worlds, and like also one of our core tenets when like designing that role play was that we would try to accommodate people's people's ideas.
I think my interpretation, like what led me to that being the core, was like looking at the factions, right? Like from what I remember, and it has been a while, so I could be just mainly entirely forgetting if
No,
I
I
remember
agree.
right.
I agree. I like definitely like that was the big political, that was the big like political question in like in Valis, and like in the world of that role play was about free will, right?
Yeah.
The politics of the empire was all about free will.
Yeah.
So so yeah, I mean it was definitely, the strongest theme coming in, but like there was the question, right? Like here's the question that I would pose. It's like, if you're coming in as like a United Nations character, how, how were you supposed to kind of like engage with that theme? Um, and like some characters found a way, right? But we didn't really have anything explicit, right? We didn't really have anything explicit built in from the United Nations side of like about free will, right? So that was more of a um, it was certainly part of the setting, and it was very intentional, right? The free will stuff was very intentional, but it was just like one step removed, right? It's kind of like very close to being the main theme of the role play, but not quite there, in my opinion.
Mm. I get what you mean. So like they can kind of see like themes can like be kind of interlaced in the sort of design of the role play to varying degrees, and they don't necessarily need to be explicitly stated. You don't always need to say this is a role play about X Y Z. Uh, it helps to do that. Um, in some cases, you can like build things around that, like like the warp example of developing factions that are like specifically kind of built around the question of like free will and what it means to this new fantasy world. Definitely does the job as well, right? Which then would perfectly segue into number two, but we are just covering the themes for now, so that will be left until next podcast episode. But before we wrap it up, we do have a little bit of remainder of the principle to talk through, which is effectively a couple of small notes. One being that the goal of maintaining this kind of core theme of the roleplay is to maintain cohesion with of the ideas behind the roleplay. Because the longer roleplay goes on, the more they can kind of come into contact with these sorts of like core design elements of the roleplay, and those can kind of like steer a roleplay in one direction or another. Having this kind of like central idea to drive it along helps kind of keep things in the same direction. Whether characters kind of change that direction or not, you at least have some sort of core idea to say, all right, well, this is like this is the exploration that we're aiming for, and we can kind of build around this. Um, and the kind of bold sentence at the end is that the theme informs the setting, which informs its conflicts, which informs its factions, which informs its characters. So it's a whole kind of trickle down sort of effect that like once you have determined one thing, it can kind of inform everything else, kind of in this like sequential, well, not necessarily sequential, right? It's like you know, very broad sense, kind of overlays over everything, if you will. But yeah, I think the core of it being thematic kind of helps keep the sort of like ideas that come up within the roleplay more on the same track. Because as we all know, players have many different styles, many different ideas, and many different perspectives on roleplay. So as long as they are aware of like the direction that the project is going, it's very easy for them to, instead of just like deferring to their own judgment alone, based on what they see around them, they also have this basis of like, okay, I have something I can fall back on. I have this idea, like this. I can use this as a foundation, and then work from there, and that kind of helps keep the meat of it all together. We are kind of running a bit over time, but I did want to pitch over to Neon.
Hi.
The Neon has been working on a method of sorts to kind of formulate what a role play is about and kind of build the role play and kind of the subject matter of it from the ground up effectively. And I want to pitch over to you if you wanted to talk about the Neon method. Then
Yeah, I can
go for it.
quickly go over that. So this was actually I made separate originally from Couchform as a response to me asking roleplays like, how do I make a character that fits into your roleplay? Because people aren't really posting their themes. And a lot of people, the typical response that I would get was like, just make a character and we'll find a way to fit it in, which makes my job very difficult in making a character of how I do that. So I wanted to make a tool that uh, creates a bunch of stuff that you can give to both players and for storytellers and GMs to use, all disguised as world building. And basically what you do is you determine your themes and what questions you want to be talking about in your role play, and then you build up events and factions from that you can you basically like almost pre-bake like answers to certain questions and such in that people can go, okay, this is the view that I want to have in this world, so I'm going to join this faction. And then you have like a bunch of people who have like the same sort of view there, and you can also do stuff to make them argue with each other as well with the system. But the idea is it's almost like training wheels, I suppose. Maybe not training, like more like guidelines on how to like fit a character into a role play. Because that's one ideology I tend to use is how do you fit a character into the world rather than how do you make them stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And it very much reinforces that, which I find fits with themes much better if characters are a part of those things. But that's what I've been working on, is that I've tested it a lot with a whole bunch of people now. And I am on to how do you make mechanics for roleplay that revolve around themes. So it's a thing that's still in development, but the first lesson, I think it's safe to say, is done at this point. I think it's like a thing people can use now to help start their roleplay.
Cool.
Also, I use it a lot, and I have made many role plays in text form at the moment. I haven't run any yet, but I might do that actually. I might just run some and see what happens.
Do it. Right now.
So yeah. Right, okay.
Right now.
Right.
Yeah, right now.
Right.
Yep.
So what's your tragic backstories?
God, my entire family's dead. Was cursed by a demon. So I'm gonna go kill that demon.
Not tragic enough.
And I have a sword.
See,
Okay.
I stabbed my best friend 37 times in the chest. That's my tragic backstory.
Carl.
Wow.
That kills people.
Unironically, though.
What?
Yeah. For one of my characters. that is the tragic backstory. Unironically.
Oh boy.
That kills people.
It does. Yeah.
Oh my god, yeah, it truly does.
I have a question for you, Sellers.
That's me.
If I or somebody else wants to find out more about Couchform, what should I do and where should I go?
That's a great question. Couchform and the school of thought therein lives within a server called the Myriad. But what I'm going to do first and foremost is actually just link the Couchform principles, which the principles themselves of Couchform are the core of the school of thought, and talk about literally everything you would need to know about Couchform and what it stands for and what kind of things we do as a roleplay style. And then from there is a link to the Myriad Discord server where we talk about roleplay, we talk about Couchform, we have some official resources and little mints of knowledge around it. And that would be the place that you continue to learn about it and around it and kind of understand more about it. I'm going to link that in the chat right here, which I realize I cannot do on my desktop because for some reason Twitch logged me out. So if I could have one of you two do that.
I'll do that right now.
Thanks, Owen.
I also imagine, since it's like pretty trivial to like transfer or like, you know, save Twitch highlights and like you can also like post them to YouTube. I also imagine it might be findable in like the description of like whatever video if somebody's watching this somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not on Twitch.
Oh my god.
I have been timed
Message
out
deleted
by
by
your
your moderator.
You better,
Oh my god,
you better untime me out.
Oh my god, how do I do this
You
on
know-
mobile?
You know where
Oh,
you
no.
can find it? You could go to the Myriad server.
But yeah, but we can't post the link
Still has
without being
been
banned.
timed out for 120 seconds.
Oh wait.
We have
Oh,
to.
that's I see.
We just have to stall for 120 seconds.
Boop, boop, boop.
So,
Well,
I hate this. This is like the worst thing ever. Cause like it was literally like 15 minutes before we started this podcast that like my computer decided, you know what? You're logged out of Twitch now. I couldn't log in because the text wouldn't for the two-factor authentication, it wouldn't get to my phone for some reason. And I gotta really slowly walk over to my phone where I look at the settings on my phone in the chat and don't see any of them. This is awful. Where are these settings? You can't moderate anything from this chat if you can't see the chat that it came from. This is awful. Okay. How close is it, Sylvan? Did I stall long enough?
we are 20 seconds away.
20 seconds away. All right. I'll very slowly type exclamation mark permit cilantro. And by the time that I can type this out on my mobile device with the keyboard where I use both my thumbs, and then I press the send button after someone gives me the go ahead, which I think will do the thing.
Yeah.
Let's hope that this works.
All right. If it doesn't, then we know what's up.
Wait,
You're out to get
sent
me.
it and it didn't do anything. I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna.
Oh no. All right. I'm not gonna post anything. Not yet.
Okay. Let me throw a test message in there. Okay, that test message didn't go through either. This is a disaster. I'm trying my best here, and my best apparently isn't good enough. Give me a second.
You know, maybe we can take some questions while you figure that out.
That's a great idea. Let's do that.
Yeah, we can
If anyone has any questions.
Oh man, this is the final boss. This is the final boss of Couchform is the auto mod. It's just Twitch.tv, Twitch.tv is just in the way. Just, man.
Oh god.
In like every conceivable way possible. Okay. There we go. I did it. 60 seconds.
Oh shoot, I have 60 seconds. All right, I'm gonna shoot quick. Okay, there is one. And Discord link, invite. Make it never. Okay, Junior E-Link, copy. Boom. Excellent. All right, we have links.
Perfect. All right, it worked. Stream Elements has made this exceptionally difficult for us. Finally, no VTM links. Neon has officially made this the VTM podcast.
I'm down. Thank you for coming to my podcast.
That's the next couch that we sit on. It's like a VTM couch.
The VTM couch.
I think
It's a different couch every week.
Are we doing a different couch or a different background? Because I was thinking like we just move the same couch over to like.
Or I mean,
different places.
you don't know. Just because the couches look the same doesn't mean it's the same couch. Are you really going to sit on the same couch twice? Like
I'm gonna Sharpie this couch. So we know it's the same couch.
Oh my god. I just bought this couch.
Your first thought was to put it on the beach?
Look. I didn't put it there. It just appeared here at the beach. Same questionable Cheeto. I was saving that, Curlon. I'm gonna just take that from you. Yoink. All right. Before we get majorly off topic, put it back under the same cushion. My God. I will once again open the floor for any questions before we wrap up.
While we wait for questions, I have one,
Ooh, go ahead.
which might occupy our time until if and when anyone else decides to ask one.
Is it the question of why Curlon has 2 accounts? Is it that question?
No, it's not
I'm
that
onto you,
question.
Curlon.
It's
I'm
not
onto
that
you.
question, though we are watching. It's the question of, we're talking about themes. Themes are kind of very central. Now I know that we were just talking about like role plays, I guess, not often kind of like telegraphing their themes, but very often, just like in the Worlds Apart example, like very often role plays end up having a theme anyway. It's just or alternatively, you might create a character that explores a specific theme that's maybe not specifically the core theme of the role play. So like within that context, are there any themes that the two of you kind of come back to and like find yourself liking to explore often?
Actually, a lot of the themes I tend to go into is like society, questions about society and how society works. There's there's tend to be some pretty common ones. I think that it's really easy to talk about that and like have those themes in your role play, because like, I mean, we're all part of the society, and we will have opinions on it, so it's a thing that we can quite easily get invested in.
I guess trying to find the common threads between all of my characters and all the things that I've written. I generally tend, and I've said this like basically since like day one of how I make characters, since I've started making characters, but I always make my characters as like a product of their environment. And effectively, kind of the thematic approach that I have to that is like figuring out what kind of questions and differences that sort of product of an environment can create, and how that can interface with the rest of the role play. In some cases, like the first case, kind of being this question of like religion and what it means to be kind of deeply tied to this sort of like deific influence, which is already known to exist, but like is more than just the thing you pray to. To some people, to this guy, it'd be like something different, and asking questions around that. The next character having been like this person in a very high up position in society, on a mission where he's basically just trying to prove himself, and he is essentially feeling like he has a lot to prove, that he's always got the highest expectations, and or people have the highest expectations of him rather, and that's he has to do everything perfectly, everything right, or else he will fail. And there was also this question of like uh, looking at kind of the wars within society, and having come from a place that doesn't have them, how do you see war? Like, how do you see people fighting each other for dominance or for material gain? So like, I guess my kind of themes that I always go back to are things that effectively draw from a place within the world that create these sort of like differences in understanding about something, where a character just might straight up have a different understanding of life, like a different way of handling themselves, or like just I like poking at something, right? I like very specifically poking at something. I don't think I necessarily have like a single thing that I like always going back to. I think what I generally do is not create the inner conflict from a long-lived experience. So like I usually don't create inner conflicts from backstory, if that makes sense. Like the themes of my characters tend to come from having a stable background and drawing culture and ideas from that and then putting them into the melting pot that is the role play. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Suppose I might answer my
Yeah.
own question. Well, yeah, I don't know. I definitely have a pattern in the sort of characters that I like to play. I think there's like two like main things that I like exploring. The first one is not so much a single theme, but more like a collection of them. I really like playing with emotions. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've played, the character that's always happy. I've played another character that's always happy. I've played the character that kind of like alternates between being like really calm and being passionately angry. And now I'm playing a character that can't express their emotions. Um, so I just like really like playing with emotions and like exploring the consequences of those emotions. So that's not like necessarily like a specific theme, but once again, it's like a certain type of theme that I don't know, it just tickles my brain, I guess. Most of my characters usually have some um, like an emotional like a certain emotional theme to them. Um, but the other thing that and I guess this one's a specific theme. The other thing that I like exploring, this is, I suppose, maybe like a kind of like I'm at least a little bit influenced by absurdism, like maybe a bit of like optimistic absurdism here, which is absurdism is kind of like the idea that the universe is large and irrational, right? The universe is fundamentally irrational, and like any attempts by people to like make sense of the universe are just it's not that it's like wrong. It's just like a fundamentally flawed idea to try to make sense of something that's irrational. I would say I lean more towards kind of like the optimistic absurdism, which can be summed up with like the only meaning that exists within the universe is what you find, what you yourself find in it. It's more of like an optimistic take on the same idea, where there's no like inherent meaning. There's no inherent meaning to anything, but when when somebody like cares about a thing, that gives it meaning. Um, so maybe that's it's a bit more optimistic, but I also really like exploring that.
Yeah. Just the idea of like breaking down our own kind of understandings, right, of like things that we made sense of, and like rationalizing, this is like the understanding that we've attributed to it, but not like what it is. I like that sort of thing, huh?
Something like that, I suppose. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's I mean the philosophy is well, um, oh boy, it can be a bit of a rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
and honestly, I do not have any uh grounds on which to debate or even really talk about like philosophy stuff. Um, that's just like a particular thing that I find myself drawn towards.
Mm. I've also made the epiphany like 5 minutes ago that the thing I always go back to is status. I always build themes around status. There's some like because of this difference in status or this understanding of status that my character's experience was like this, right? Like I'm just putting those like pieces together, and even like the roleplay that I'm building right now, Legacy, is very very fundamentally rooted in the ideas that status is dependent on things, and kind of exploring what that means for certain characters, right? And at the very surface level, it's like, oh, people have all these cool powers, but like, what does that mean for how the character has lived? What's their lived experience? How they succeeded in life? Why is that? Uh, and all that is like very intrinsically tied to like questions about status. So I've basically just made that realization again, literally 5 minutes ago. So great question. Thanks for helping me realize that.
Wow.
Yay!
It was all me. I take 100% credit for it.
I love taking credit for things, especially if it has nothing to do with me.
Dylan basically just said, I did this, smile.
You made
Yep.
this? I made this.
I made this.
I think this is also like a good example of showing that whether you're intending to or not, you are dealing with themes. Themes always arise. It's a lot more useful if you start like trying to focus in on what those themes are and build around it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That way you'll have other people there with you to explore those themes together. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
That is pretty cool. Well,
yeah.
I think it is about time we wrap up this episode. I really enjoyed this episode one. It was a great discussion on what Couchform is about and what the core is. Our plan, our goal for this is to try to cover one principle every episode. So we have a total of 12 of those, which means the intended runtime, as we have planned it so far, is to run through 12 full podcast episodes of each of these principles, talking about what they're about and like how they apply to what we do as role players, and ways that we can kind of interpret it. So these are going to be like even more kind of deep dives into what each of these mean, and we've actually kind of alluded to some of them in some of this conversation we've had here today. So definitely a lot to look forward to. What we're going to try to do is kind of try to bring up some of the contributors that have most contributed to these sorts of ideas there, and we have a good few contributors to kind of bring up. So we're gonna have some really interesting perspectives to go through, and it'll be great. Look forward to it. Do you two have anything to say before we sign off?
Just wondering how much. I'm just wondering how our timing is going to work because we. But I suppose we can figure that out. Like I imagine we'll figure out exactly the format that we want to do as we go forward. But yeah.
I suppose I don't really have too much to say other than thank you for having me on this podcast and letting me talk about Vampire the Masquerade and how it's better than everything else.
Yeah, thanks for sticking around for the Vampire the Masquerade podcast. It's great having you.
Yeah.
All right. So, so with that being said, it is time to sign off then. Thank you both for your time. Thanks everyone who's watching over there, whether it's in the stage or in the chat over there. And yeah, hope you guys appreciated the podcast. And
bye,
we'll
Curlon.
see you guys.
Goodbye, Curlon.
BTM again.
Bye.
All right. And my cat also says goodbye. We'll see you guys next time for episode 2, where we talk about design and what it informs within a roleplay. All right. See you all next time.
Spoilers, everything.
Yeah, it's everything.